Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
I never planned to write a memoir, but I discovered essays when I was in college. I started writing when I was a graduate student, and I studied with Vivian Gornick, who's a wonderful writer, and she read some of my early nonfiction, and she taught me a very valuable lesson in 3 words. What's the point?
Right.
Boy, she hammered that into me. What's the point?
Right.
It was good instruction. The point isn't your life. There has to be another point.
Right.
It can't be. It's not personal. It's not really even about you. It's about something bigger than you.
And what is bigger than you when it comes to this Left-Handed Man, the Confessions?
Well, for instance, the title piece, Confessions of a Left-Handed Man, is about the fact that I'm left-handed and I was mauled by a dog and I lost the use of my left hand for quite a long time. And with it, a sense of my own identity. And I didn't realize how much I did with that hand and how much I identified myself with the things that I did with my left hand. For instance, my writing, my drawing, and I also was a songwriter and guitar player. And I couldn't do any of those things anymore. And it was the way I distinguished myself from my twin.
Because he's right.
So all these distinguishing factors were lost with the use of that hand. And so the essay is about left-handedness, about the stigma that's been attached for thousands of years to being left-handed, and that remains in some way built into our society, and also about this business of identity that comes out of left-handedness. You know, so the essay is about left-handedness and identity and how those two things merged for me.
You have a twin? Mm-hmm. So is he identical?
No, but we were very easy to mistake for each other.
Okay.
Even now, I stayed in my brother's house, and I was walking down his street. And even now that we're, much older, his neighbors was coming up to me and saying, "Hi, George." So people still think we look similar enough to confuse us.
Oh.
It's kind of amazing, because when we were younger, people really couldn't tell us apart. We were so close to each other in looks.
Are you close in other ways?
Now we are.
What ways?
Oh, in many ways. We think alike. We have the same pet peeves. We love to get together and sort of, commiserate and share things that have happened to us during the day. And we think alike. We're both very sort of detail-oriented, and in some ways we're kind of reactionary together. My brother is very well-read. He's an economist. He's a professor of economics.
Okay.
Very, very well known in his field. And so, but George reads everything, and he's always recommending wonderful authors, of fiction, often, people who were writing 30, 40 years ago, who I never have heard of.
Oh.
So we share a love of books and writing, and he's also a very good writer.
Does he like what you write?
He does.
He does.
He really does.
That's
And
helpful.
if he doesn't, he tells me. There's some things he'll get on my case if I use an extraneous word or a word that seems in some way pretentious or mannered. And he's very good at spotting. And I do the same for him. We read each other's work.
So he's constructive.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because that
entirely.
helps, because you don't want somebody floating your boat. You don't want that, but then you don't want somebody overcritical either.
My brother is a very good critic, and my mother's a very good critic. Unlike my father, my mother speaks English with a very thick Italian accent.
Oh.
English is very much her second language and not her first, and yet she's a very astute reader of my work and a good critic. She says good things.
Sounds like you got a good support system.
I do. Of course, in other respects, my mother and I, we have our differences, But as far as having a great literary critic in the family, I trust her opinion 100%.
Because this is something different. This book is different from what you've written in the past.
A little bit, yeah.
In what ways?
In some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. I've always been a heavily autobiographical writer. But, of course, in the short stories and the novel, you're inventing things. But I often cut close to the autobiographical bone. So in that sense, it really wasn't a great departure. But, with an essay or with memoir, that's it. You're telling the truth.
Right.
As close as you can remember it, you're telling the truth.
Your truth.
My truth. You can't make things up. The only thing you can do is, if you really don't remember something verbatim, you're allowed to fill in a few little things that seem right according to your memory. That's why memoir. So in that sense, it's really not that different. I never planned to write a memoir. What I'm most happiest about is that it really works as a memoir. It is a memoir, even though it was written in discrete pieces. People have not even noticed that.
Right.
You know, they've sort of read them as chapters, which is...
Was that not your intention?
Well, it certainly wasn't when I wrote them as essays originally, right? I mean, I
So
never
you can
did-
start from back and
Yeah,
go.
but I think people who read this, you know, they're not even aware that the pieces were not meant to go together to form this book, which is nice.
Yeah, because you have kind of an eclectic thing. I mean, you're talking about your family, you're talking about your feelings about left-handedness, and then you have this stuff about the different jobs you've had in your life. Were you like searching to get to this point, or were you just trying different things out?
Well, I didn't know what point I was trying to get to. What I knew was that I wanted to express myself artistically. That goes back, to high school and even before. The desire, the thought of being an artist was implanted in me at a fairly early age. I knew I liked to draw. I had a little bit of a ham in me, you know, a performer. I acted in plays. I liked to sing. I liked music. So there were all these things flitting about the arts. Writing wasn't one of them. I was a very, very adequate writer, I guess, like everyone else, and I was a very adequate reader. I mean, I was not one of these people who grew up surrounded by books and in a library, or who had some sort of terrible disease that put them in a hospital where they read Proust. You know, that never happened to me. I was a healthy kid who went outside and rode my bicycle. I knew I wanted to be an artist. That was the only thing I knew, but then I had no idea what kind or how I would go about it. I went to art school. I dabbled in filmmaking and theater. I studied painting. I studied illustration. I was grappling. I was searching, and I was confused. I was terribly confused.
Are you less confused now?
Yeah, I'm less confused, but it's taken me half a century to get there.
Right.
And I'm only less confused. I'm not confused.
So you're okay with the searching?
Yeah, I mean, it has its ups and downs. I think it's been a very interesting life so far.
It sounds like it.
People say, well, you're too young to have written a memoir. Well, no, I'm not.
People will say anything.
People say anything,
They do.
Say, who the hell do you think you are writing a memoir?
Right.
No, it's the search has led me to all kinds of interesting people and places and events, and I'm happy for all of it, even all the things, if you say, well, I was a playwright for 12 years. I worked very hard at my playwriting. I was very intent on it. My heroes were Tennessee Williams and Edward Albee, and I had play option for off-Broadway, quite a few productions, and I thought, okay, this is it, but it wasn't. I mean, it was a step along the way.
Right.
But what a great thing to have had that experience, to know what it's about.
Yeah, well, because in your curvy journey, you're learning.
Yeah, it's all about the curvy journey. Yeah,
Bumping your
okay.
head.
Yeah. We live in a time, in an era, where there's so much emphasis on specialization, and everything's being professionalized, even the writing business, niche platform, what's your specialty. And I think that specializing is good, but I think it would be wonderful, better, if you've had a long, confusing apprenticeship.
Right.
Where you've experienced different things, and you know what things are about. I also think, too, that having your fingers in different media in the arts,
Right.
that visual expression informs the written word. Or it gives you, it certainly equips you with many, many metaphors.
True.
I'm often finding when I teach, which is in itself, I think, an art.
Yeah, because there's many bad teachers, and they do
Sure.
a lot of damage.
Oh, yeah, I know, and I get their students.
Yes,
But-
I've had some of those teachers.
Yeah, but I'm always reaching toward painting and the visual arts for metaphors for writing. Paint the scene, the whole idea of composition,
Right.
and how we use space. And I think it trains your visual eye as a descriptive writer to have that background. I mean, that's the meaning of the liberal arts.
Right.
Liberal in the sense that we're not only free but almost compelled to dabble.
Right, to be eclectic.
To be eclectic, if nothing else, come away with an appreciation of what it is that a playwright does, or a songwriter, or a truck driver,
Right.
or a short order cook,
Right.
or an engineer. We need to touch those things.
Well, how will you know if you don't try them?
You don't know. You have no idea.
Right.
And I think, too, that somebody who studies writing, who takes a creative writing class, even if they don't make it their business to write, their reading is going to be a different experience for those people for the rest of their lives. They're never going to read books the same way.
No, exactly.
You know? And that's a wonderful thing.
I agree with you completely. This book speaks to me so much because people are just not exposed.
Yeah.
They just don't know. They can't even flourish in some ways without experiencing life in different ways, in different views.
Yeah.
And I love that.
And it's interesting, too, how, when you dabble in enough things, or when you have these kinds of experiences, you start to find the connections between them all.
I just have an appreciation for people who just throw themselves and are passionate about it.
And sometimes I really admire interviewers like yourself, hosts, like the old talk show hosts, people like Steve Allen. Steve Allen was a Renaissance man who, in his career, must have spoken with so many people from all different walks of life about what they did and sort of absorbed some of that. And life is sort of this banquet, and there's all these people who do all these interesting things, and so many of us just stay in this one little, tight little, comfortable box.
Right.
And all we do is talk to our, our colleagues in whatever field we're in, and it's just the same.
You're saying your safety zone.
Yeah, safety zones. That's what Confessions of a Left-Handed Man. It's, if there's an overall theme of an artist's career, if you like, but also the theme of coming at things from a different direction, left-handed, and not taking the straight path.
Right.
Not taking the straight and narrow path as an education.
Right, exactly. You just don't know where you're going to get, and if you always just go that line.
But and it's happening at the place where I teach too, a lot of these colleges that have had from their inception a real hardcore liberal arts philosophy, which was the philosophy that people should be rounded, that people should have a wide base of knowledge, broad reading the classics or whatever. That's under threat right now.
Oh, yeah.
Seriously under threat, and even in my school they're talking about, oh no, we have to do more like practical education, training people to go into business. It's really so sad.
It's sad.
Like these young people, 20 years old, are going to spend 2 years studying business, getting their practical knowledge, going to business. They're going to be the dullest people in the world.
Right.
And their lives are going to be diminished, and the whole country will, in a way, be diminished. When I was living in the Upper West Side in New York, that used to be an extremely bohemian neighborhood.
Right.
Then the prices started going up and up and up, and all these professionals, Wall Street types, moved into the neighborhood. And suddenly the cafes that were such lively places of discussion and intercourse and people meeting and, all these artists were filled with Wall Street people who had never really done much of anything else.
Right.
And not to put Wall Street people down, because there's some very interesting people who end up working at Wall Street, but these were all people who that was their whole career path. And suddenly the cafes just became dull.
Right.
The whole neighborhood became much duller. That's a microcosm for what could end up happening with the culture in general if we push in that direction.
Been major studies the last 30 years where they test freshman college students for their level of empathy, and it has gone down extremely low. It's like, what's the difference between with no empathy? You're almost a psychopath. So if you don't have that well-rounded view, you have the black and white thinking, and you can't have as much compassion for others.
It's an exaggeration to say that this kind of narrow-minded education model produces sociopaths.
Right, I know.
However, it is an exaggeration in the right direction.
You got to get people's attention.
Right, that'll get people's attention. So you've got it now.
Right.
No, I'm all for people being sort of lost for a while and searching, and that whole process of not knowing, so that we really learn who we are, as opposed to jumping to a conclusion about who we are.
Right.
When we're 20 years old.
Well, they make them know in high school now. They're like, what are you going to do? What's
Yeah.
your major? I wouldn't be probably doing this right now. Who knows what I would have been doing? And I would have missed out on so much.
Yeah.
Pain, too. I think people try to avoid pain.
Yeah.
And those kind of experiences, failures, are what I've grown from the most.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that is important, too, that part of that journey.
I think so. As someone who has failed at many things, if you want to look at it that way, I'm really happy about it, because it's made my life. It's made
you.
It's made me. I'm a better person. I'm a better writer. The other way of looking at it is all of those things were courses along the way.
Right.
None of it that I really regret.
Good.
None of it.
Good.
Not
Well,
at
yeah,
all.
because you would be different.
Yeah.
If you've changed anything.
Yeah.
So, and who knows what you would have missed. And that's how I look at life, too. It's just like, oh, well, you're right. Like, to say failure, people sometimes look at that. It's just part of your journey. The changes, maybe that misdirection that you really weren't supposed to go in anyway.
Yeah, we have to try things. I have an essay in the book about being a caricaturist.
I saw that.
I supported myself for many years, and even when I was intent on writing, and I was writing my first unpublished novels. And during that period, I worked by drawing people. Mm-hmm. I drew...
With the big heads?
Well, kind of. Mine were not really the lollipop... They call them lollipop head. And I didn't do that. Mine were a little more realistic, if you like. Oh, I must have drawn 10,000 people over a period of 12 years. Yeah.
Ouch. I would imagine your hand would cramp.
No, that wasn't an issue. Actually, people are surprised when I tell them, and I've written about this. During the holiday season, I worked at parties. I didn't work in the street.
Oh, okay.
I was one of a dozen professional caricaturists who did the rounds in New York City, and we were hired out usually $120 and $150 an hour.
Oh.
And a typical party would be 5 hours, and we'd typically do 30 parties just during the holiday season. Corporate parties. I could live a year off that.
Yeah, you could.
I could live a year off that. The only problem was that the parties, the music was very loud sometimes, and the booze was free.
Oh.
And the marker fumes I worked with were, I found out...
toxic.
Yes. And men were smoking cigars, because that was that period of the 80s and 90s when the cigars were big. So there were a lot of work hazards involved with it. So I got paid really, really well, but it was wonderful. I mean, in a sense, to be able to make really good living. And every time you drew somebody, it was like you had a chance to look into that person's soul, for 5 minutes. And it was an interesting window into humanity. That's sort of like, because when you draw somebody, you really do get to know things about that person through observation and through their eyes.
Do they talk to you when they do it? Or?
Yes, but that's the least of it. And
right.
You find out things like, where they're from and what they do and all that, but that's not really where you learn.
It's a sense.
It's a sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sense of, and even things like discovering that people are lonely. Yes. Or that people are frightened or insecure.
Yes.
Or occasionally happy.
Right.
Though that would be the exception.
Right. Well, nonverbal speaks so loudly.
Yeah.
People could say so many things and speak totally different through their nonverbals.
That's right. That's right.
And you got a chance to have a real part in that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very intimate connection because, you're spending 5 minutes only, but you're 5 minutes where you're intent
right.
on that other person.
Right.
And you really, it's a very interesting...
It's vulnerable and like exposure. They probably didn't even intend that you were getting or maybe even know that you're getting.
Yeah, and that's what you're there for.
Right.
You're there to get them, to get the essence of someone. And that essence is not just going to be superficial. The part that comes out of the eyes
right.
is not superficial. It's the soul that radiates through the eyes.
True. So you were privileged to get that.
It was a privilege. It was a privilege. My father was, he was a vice president of one of the divisions of what was then called the Bureau of Standards, which is now the Department of Weights and Measures.
Oh.
And he was in charge of different sort of engineering patents and things.
Smart guy.
He was a very smart guy. My father was sort of off the charts smart. Yeah.
Right.
He probably has about 42 patents in his name.
Oh, really?
And now that Google has them all online, you can actually go to Google patents and download all the patents with the drawings and everything.
Oh,
it's really
really?
amazing. So I have them all in my computer.
Was he very much a logical approach toward being a father, or was he touchy-feely?
No, he wasn't touchy-feely.
I wouldn't imagine.
He wasn't touchy-feely, but he was very charming. He was funny.
Okay.
He was funny. So I'll give you an example of something, and you tell me how to characterize it. When he would spank us, he would make a joke out of it. He would pretend that he was a spanking machine, and he would accompany the spanking with sound effects.
Oh.
Yeah. And so what happened was, when my father spanked me, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and I was sort of crying and laughing at the same time.
Oh,
because it was
confusing.
funny, but that's why I'm so confused. Because my father made a joke out of punishing me. My parents were from Europe, But my father had his shop at the bottom of the driveway where he invented things, and he made his living as an inventor. He was the real thing. And he had all the machines, and he did everything from the drafting table where he would, do the drawings, and then he would make his own parts at all these wonderful machines for mill and lathe and saws, and then the electronic circuits. And he had oscilloscopes and voltmeters, and it was like walking into a scientist's lair and seeing this process. And some of the machines were really fabulous.
I can only imagine. Do you have that kind of desire or affinity to be able to do that type of...
No, I always like to say that I invent things too, only my things that I invent only work on paper, and they're usually made of words or paint.
Right, but you're engineering. You're definitely engineering.
We're still engineering. We're still, inventing things. We're still creating things, but they're not machines. And my father said something to me once that made a big impression. He said, Peter, he had an English accent. He learned English in England as a boy, even though he was born in Italy. He said, Peter, don't ever be an engineer. He said, because work with people. He said, with people, if you kick them, you get a reaction. With machines, if you kick them, it doesn't do any good.
No, it's not as forgiving, and you get no feedback.
Of course, what he didn't tell me was with people, you want to kick them more often.
True. Now that you've published the book and it's out, would there be any changes that you would make now to it that you've had time to reflect on it?
I would be tempted to introduce material that I've written since, because there's always something that, you keep writing and writing more stuff. But not to the extent where I'm saying to myself, oh, gee, darn.
Right.
What if, it could have been. I'm very happy with it the way it is. I don't think it really needs anything else.
No regrets then?
No regrets.
Awesome.
No regrets. And I'm very pleased about how it turned out. The notion of a chaotic, disjointed, searching life that leads to something that ultimately, you could say that this book is sort of all these loose threads of an existence coming together.
Disjointed.
Joining together.
Right.
And subsidiary themes in there about art and also about solitude. Solitude is a recurring theme that grows stronger as the book progresses and as the memoirist matures, which is sort of interesting because I think that is something, at least that I've discovered in my life, not only the joy of solitude, but also the inevitability of a certain kind of solitude. For an artist, anyway.
I think that there's a very large part of the population that avoids solitude at any cost. I mean, I think that's why we have so many avoidance things.
That's right. And that's why we don't get to know each other, because we're afraid what we're going to find out.
Right.
The great fear. Right where the collection breaks off is right around the time where I became a father for the first time.
Oh, then that changes everything.
That's the next book.
Oh, good. I was going to ask you that.
Or the book after that.
Right, right.
So
because you're not going to stop. Because this
course
is your
not.
That's
No,
good.
No, not
Expose yourself. Why not? You have something to provide.
One way or another. Yeah,
right.
Legally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Legally, right. Well, I really want to say thank you, Peter. Selgin, Confessions of a Left-Handed Man, an artist memoir, so don't miss it because it is complex and yet revealing. I think that it's a good read. So I thank you for coming. You have been listening to Julie Teeling at Life Improvement Radio.
Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and shall not be construed in any way as advice from Life Improvement Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by the producers, writers, or editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the expressed written consent of Life Improvement Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.